Definitely. I mean, obviously, Protos is loving this bull run from Bitcoin and Ethereum and the crypto industry, and I think the rest of the security token industry is as well. I think we'll be back up to that $500 million mark in no time, especially with more assets listing soon. We see that INX is going to launch. We know that Realty is going to start listing even more properties, and as there is volatility in the crypto industry, as you said, we can expect volatility with the dexes.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's time maybe to dive into that main topic, shall we?
Let's do it. So, one of the things that we like to do on the show is we like to clarify terminology and make sure that we as an industry understand the concepts and jargon and we agree on the new lingo being thrown around. So, in many cases, it could be play on words like securitize as a company name, but in fact, the concept of securitization and tokenization are radically different despite being linked and tied together.
It's critical that the industry is clear, and when we're talking about finance, it's easy to get complex and therefore hazy. So securitization itself is indeed a new concept in relative terms. Most of us were actually only introduced to this idea during the housing market crash in 2008, which is largely due to bad securitizations of mortgages.
That's a perfect segue into securitization, Kyle. And I think our listeners already know what security tokens are. So, of course, securitizations are a fascinating and broad encompassing subject in finance. It's simple and brilliant, but in the end, still novel finance that can be applied in many, many different ways. But to be clear, the mortgage crisis was not caused by the concept of securitization, it was the bad actors in the system who abused it.
Right, exactly. So we're here to break it down for you on the show because, as Herwig expertly said, the terminology is not interchangeable with the idea of tokenization. Securitization and tokenization are very different concepts and they're related to each other, but they aren't the same thing. So, Herwig, you once developed a digital special purpose vehicle platform, or SPVs. So why don't you give the securitization 101 to our listeners?
With pleasure. And if you want to learn more about SPVs, these special purpose vehicles, if you will, check out episode 67 on the show where we cover it in detail. You can find all our main topic clips exclusively on our YouTube channel.
Right. So SPVs are very important for securitization.
In a sense, they're actually like the backbone. So an SPV essentially is a shell company, usually an LLC, that holds the assets that are being used for securitization. So in this case, with the mortgages example, the concept came about when banks couldn't sell individual loans. They were just too small. But if you bundled all the mortgages together, it could be big enough. And with diversified risk, that the investment vehicle is now attractive and now large enough for investors to want to buy and trade. And their securitization is being used for mortgages, and the SPV is the investment vehicle that holds all the mortgages. So, Kyle, why don't you give a different example of securitization for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. So loans and credit products are common for securitization because they provide yield and cash flows to the investors, but we also see a ton of securitization in private real estate and private companies. Highly illiquid assets are a good target for securitization because trading them is honestly a pain. So a building, for example, or gold is another. It would be much easier to trade a company that owns those assets instead, using an SPV specifically, instead of actually just trading those assets as their own.
Yeah, those are great examples, Kyle. That's why securitization is such a big deal in finance. It's a conduit for investors to an asset. Security tokens, on the other hand, cover much more than just securitizations. Debt instruments and bonds, for example, can be tokenized, but are not securitizations. Trading equities themselves, stocks, are of course not securitizations if they directly represent the company, not a second layer between it like an SPV is, hence the term special purpose vehicle in the first place. So, however, one of the big themes of security tokens is, of course, making securities and assets more liquid. So securitization is often a tool used for security token offerings. For example, a startup may not want 1,000 new investors on their cap table, but they do want people to be able to buy a piece of their company for $500. So they use an SPV to securitize a portion of their equity, and that LLC manages that specific asset and can even become a tradable security while the rest of the company remains illiquid. So investors would be trading the LLC that owns that equity, not the startup itself. So in this way, securitization and tokenization play well together, but it's also why it can be confusing because tokenizing the startup, let's say itself directly, wouldn't be a securitization.
Yeah, so that's why an issuance platform and an industry leader like Securitize is an example of a kind of a play on words here in what they're doing.
And probably for some leading to some more of this confusion, but hopefully you're confused no more. Securitization, it's a financial innovation. Tokenization, it's a technical innovation. Together, they create and embed liquidity.
Well said, Herwig. I mean, tokenization, as we've covered in the past, represents creating that blockchain-based asset to facilitate the programmatic enforcement of compliance and the regulatory standards, as well as capitalizing on market benefits with respect to settlement and asset transactions. And that has nothing to do with the actual asset that the tokenization underlies. So in that respect, securitization as an industry is much bigger than security tokens right now, but it won't be long for security tokens to outgrow that, given that securitized vehicles will almost always become security tokens, but not the other way around. Not all security tokens will be securitizations.
Yep, we can expect plenty of innovation between the two yet to come. And that's what we're so excited for. This is the future of finance, listeners.
Absolutely. And you'll hear all about it here on the Security Token Show. And with that, I think we can wrap things up for this episode, Herwig.
Yep, short and sweet. Thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you tune in next week on Tuesday for episode 77. And be sure to reach out to us on Twitter or LinkedIn with questions, feedback, or comments.
Always engage with us as well on stlmarket.com, where we submit all of our news. You can comment and engage with the community there. You can also check out the latest prices, stlmarket.com, submit news articles, comment on everything. We want to hear from you, and as always, thanks again for listening. We'll talk to you next week.